Welcome to this chess video, everyone. In this video, we're going to be looking at a little bit more advanced pawn structure things. And so for this, we're going to be sharing the three most important types of pawn levers. Most people, I think, don't even know there are different types of pawn levers. So first of all, we have to define, well, what is a pawn lever? A little review for everyone who doesn't know. A pawn lever is whenever pawns have some kind of tension. So put that in simple terms, it more or less means any pawns that are diagonal of each other, because that's how pawns attack, that is a pawn lever. So for example, here, this is a pawn lever, because black can capture white's pawn, or white can capture black's pawn. Now this is also a pawn lever, because the same thing, black can capture here, white can capture here. So there's many different types of this, and this is where a little bit of study becomes very useful. Generally, when you have the option, it's usually best to capture towards the center. If we just look at this pawn lever, if black were to capture white's pawn, this would actually favor black slightly more than it would white, because oftentimes capturing towards the center will help you control a little bit more of the center, and tends to keep the initiative in most variations. Now, what about an exchange that happens on a central file, right? Like this pawn lever right here. Well, any pawn that's actually in the blue that I've highlighted here, if it's a trade that starts and ends on that, meaning one of the central files, it's more or less neutral. So it doesn't really matter too much. If white were to capture this way or black were to capture this way, they haven't really gained any advantage in the center because central files tend to be worth roughly the same. Hypothetically, if we had a black pawn here on c3, then white's capture here wouldn't be as beneficial as black capturing here, because in this case, black's pawn will be going towards the central file, whereas white's pawn is going away from a central file. And so now let's put this into practice. Let's look at these 5 pawns here. And so for this, if it is white to move, and they have the option, and both pawn moves are good, then which one would be preferred? Would it be f5, or would it be h5? And in this situation, h5 is actually the better move, because the resulting capture will have white capturing towards the center. Whereas if we were to play f5 instead, then their capture would be capturing away from the center. Now those same 5 pawns are actually pretty beneficial, because whenever you have pawns like this, that is pretty useful, because whenever you push one of those pawns, then the enemy actually doesn't have much choice, because they can't really pass by your pawn, because then of course you would just capture for free. So it's actually kind of a useful configuration when your pawns are one square apart in a lot of situations. If we were to look at like the pawn lever here, for example, well, if it's black to move, they don't have to capture this. They have the extra option of just pushing their pawn past. Whereas here, they don't have that. If we play h5, they don't really want to push here because they're just giving up a pawn for nothing. But I think that's a pretty good review for now. So let's get to the different types of pawn levers. So now I'd like to share this type of pawn lever, which is called a chain lever. And it's called that because, of course, it's connected to the pawn chain. Here we have a chain lever on the right side of the board here, where we kind of have this like diamond configuration with the pawns. And so that is this characteristic of a chain lever. Now the reason that this is important is because the chain lever will produce a pass pawn by force. Well, how a chain lever could happen would be something like if we look to the left side of the board, let's say it's black to move, and they play pawn to b5. Well, maybe white doesn't really want to trade in some lines, they have the option of creating this chain lever with d5. So usually it happens when one side is kind of pushing, trying to push by, and then you push the other pawn, and now there's much tension here. Now let's again look back to the right side and see how this could become significant. So let's say that here it is black to move, and they play g captures f5. So now how do we create our pass pawn? Well, of course we could capture this way, and that would be fine, then the pawns would start running down the board. We also have the option of just pushing our pawn, and maybe in some lines that'll be better. However, in most situations with the chain lever, when they capture this way, we'll want to capture the other way. So in this case, it'll be g captures h5. And the reason why is because here we're creating an outside pass pawn. Now, in some lines, you might create the inside pass pawn going this way and then running up the board here. But really, the main factor is where is their king, or what pieces can stop our pawn. Go this way, we're going to promote on h8. And if we were to go the other way, we might promote on, say, like f8. Now, why does that matter? Well, let's go to a position where that actually matters. Here it's black to move, and let's say that they capture this way. Well, in this situation, white only has one winning move. And so what move would they play? Well, their enemy king might be able to stop our white pawn. So we want to go to the file that is furthest away from their king. In this case, g captures h5 is successful with the chain lever, and this is going to end up winning the game. It would capture this way. They could try and track down our pawn, but we're just in time, and we'll promote. Now, you may notice that they're so close to catching our queen, that if they were to try anything else, if they were to go here, if we capture this way, of course they'll catch us very quickly. And even if we push this pawn without capturing, they'll still be able to catch us. show something real briefly like this, and you'll see that they're just in time to catch us, whether we're promoting on f8 or g8. And then, of course, we'll lose the queen, and of course, black is much better because they have the resulting pawns still on the board. And so the next example we'll show is called the Pincer Lever. And so that is this configuration here for black, where they're actually going to be trying to decoy one of their enemy pawns to try and use a similar idea where we're going to have our pawns further away from their king. So in this case, black's best move here is actually to play pawn to a3 and actually play this pawn sacrifice. This is the quickest way to actually win the game. And so what is the reason for that? Well, white has to respond to this. If they do nothing with this pawn, we'll just capture and then we'll promote very quickly. Now, what if they push? Well, then this pawn will capture and then we're going to promote. And so they have to react to that. Now, if they capture our a pawn, we'll capture this way. And again, we're just far enough away that our pawn is just in time to get a queen. But going back, you can see that our pawn sacrifice with this pincer lever was much needed. Because if we were to capture here on c3, well then this is a mistake because we've actually blown the game to a draw. Now they can just capture back, and then we can start chasing the pawns this way. But we're not really in time, we can't make progress, we'll just push, they go here, and it'll be king opposition, and this is going to be a draw. And of course worse is after a3 you could blow the game entirely if here instead you try and push to d3, because now they'll actually be in time to catch your pawn, and then white is actually winning the game. So the key idea with the pincer lever is you have to decoy their pawn this way, and then capture the pawn that just lost their defense. In this case, the capture on c3, and now you're far enough away that their king cannot catch you in time. And so now let's look at the next example, which is known as a cross lever. And so a cross lever is the formation that we have here, where it's literally almost like a pawn cube, but we have 2 pawns from us and 2 pawns from the opponent. This actually forms the cross here, because they can capture this way, we can capture this way, and you can see that this is sort of like a cross slightly tilted. And so that's where it gets this name cross lever. Now the useful thing to know about cross levers is that when these form, if we were to look on the right side here, if black were to play g5 here, well now that this is formed, we have to look what side has a space advantage. If we're exactly on the center of the board, like this line here between the 4th rank and the 5th rank, generally speaking, it tends to be about equal. Now any side could have some kind of capture, say g captures f5, they could capture back, and then it's going to be some kind of pawn race, and we'll notice that both are going to promote roughly the same time. Now in this case it would be promoting with check and white would be winning, but if this king was somewhere else, we're ignoring the kings on the board, then one side will get a queen and the other side will get a queen. And maybe in some situations that might not be enough. Now with the cross lever, the side that tends to be better is the one with the space advantage. If we were to look at the example on the left, here white is better because these pawns here are slightly more advanced, and so if there's any kind of capture that happens, such as c captures b6, well then regardless if black captures themselves or if they end up pushing, they're not going to be in time because white is going to promote into a queen first. So a cross lever can be a useful idea because of the potential to create a pass pawn by force. Now the drawback to it is the tension with a cross lever tends to be extremely short-lived. Usually you create it and then some side is going to trade very quickly, either now or later, and so very rarely will the tension be maintained. Now, the reason this is significant is if we were to play this much earlier in the game, say like here, then what's going to happen is if we have a situation like this, and then black tries to cross lever, it's not really gaining too much for them. And that's why this variation here in the Queen's Gambit, the Austrian variation, is actually pretty unpopular, because black really doesn't have that much. I'd consider calling this move kind of dubious. Maybe I'd even give it like this inaccuracy, because they really don't have enough and white has the initiative. And so the tension will be very short-lived. Say we capture here, and then what is black going to really do? Like if they go here, this is kind of gambit territory, we're just having an extra pawn for free. So although they're trying to get the tension very quickly, it's not going to be long-lasting enough that's really any threat to white. Now, black could delay this slightly and actually play an opening that was a favor to Garry Kasparov in the 1980s, and that opening is the Tarrasch defense, where after a normal Queen's Gambit declined and knight c3, here on move 3, black actually plays c5. And the idea is they're trying to open up the position very quickly and try and go for quick tactics. Of course, this worked well for Kasparov's repertoire because he was extremely good in tactics. That was his strength. And so even if this opening was a little questionable from a positional standpoint, it helped him get many victories. you know there's many different types of pawn levers, not just the standard one where you have pawns immediately diagonal to each other. Hopefully with a little study you can learn the pros and cons of each of these different pawn levers, and of course the more knowledge the better. Thanks for stopping by everyone. I'll see you in the next chess video.